All right then. Well, good morning, everybody. And we're very, very honored to be here to speak with you. We put up a slide here saying what it is, and this is Policing and Public Health Nexus. And we titled the program Voices of Future Leaders. I am Professor John Furman from American University, and you can tell looking at me that I'm not the voice of future leaders, so I will be very brief my moderation duties here, but I did want to kick us off a little bit and kind of set the table. What we're talking about and what this conference is talking about, and compliments to the folks who've organized it and are doing it. What a wonderful, amazing thing. This conference and what we're doing at American University is really about saving lives. There's no question that the nexus between public health and policing is urgently needed. It's made progress in some places and it has not made sufficient progress in others, and it hasn't been as innovative and creative as it could be. So we're excited to be here to talk about what we're doing at AU to address that problem. The second point I'd like to make is that we're also going to be talking today a little bit about the practicum model itself. This is a very strange and intriguing educational model, a client-based practicum, and American University has been creating has created several practicums over the past several years. And we thank Temple for their very, very early work years and years ago to design the practicum model. That practicum model changes things dynamically. So students become consultants, literally to a client who has a request for research, and then they go to work. So we think that the model is probably one of the best real world experiences for students around the country. So we'll talk a bit about that, but mostly about the substantive work that we're doing and how we think will influence the IACP in the field. So with that, we thought we'd start with the client rather than the students, because Kelly Burke is with us from the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and they are our client. And Kelly is going to talk to you a little bit about what they asked for in this practicum, their challenge to the students. Kelly?
Thank you, Professor Furman. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly. I'm with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, or IACP, as we're known as. For those of you not familiar with IACP, we're the largest and most influential professional association for police leaders. And we have more than 30,000 members in over 165 countries. And we are the recognized leader in global policing, committed to advancing safer communities through thoughtful, progressive police leadership. So just to give a little background, IACP is focused on, preparing current and emerging police leaders and the agencies and communities that they serve to succeed in addressing the most pressing challenges, threats, and issues of the day. You may be familiar with IACP. We're the publisher of Police Chief Magazine, as well as the hosts of the annual IACP conference and exposition. It's the largest in the world for police conference and expo. And our membership is open to policing professionals from all ranks across policing, as well as the criminal justice system, and also includes academia and other related fields, including public health. So we rely on our members and our network of police practitioners and researchers and multidisciplinary partners to provide thought leadership and training and technical assistance and advocacy in the field. So when Professor Furman approached us, the IACP jumped at the opportunity to serve as the client for this course. The challenge we identified was to explore the nexus between public health and policing, as both fields aim to address threats to the safety and security of communities. And these threats are driven by complex and interwoven societal problems, as we know. And police and public health practitioners are tackling many of the same issues, from violence and mental health crises to substance use disorder crises and homelessness, and it could go on and on. So the IACP as the client for this project sought to answer some fundamental questions and kind of laid the challenge to the students. And these questions include, what is the nexus between public health and policing? What does the research tell us about the intersection between policing and public health? And what theories or frameworks have been developed that provide a new way of thinking about and addressing complex issues that threaten public safety? And what are some examples of public health approaches that have been implemented by or with police in the field? And which of these practices have been evaluated and or shown promise? So with the challenge laid out, I'll hand it off to the students to highlight the work.
Okay, Kelly, thank you so much. And we thought we would start with our client because in this practicum model, typically in any class, in any school in America, the professor needs to be very satisfied with the performance of the students, and the students need to be satisfied with how the professor manages the class. But in a client-based practicum model, it all changes because in this case, we all, the students and the professor, have to make sure our client's happy, because if the client isn't satisfied or is disappointed with the product, then the practicum has failed, right? So Kelly, thanks so much for giving us this challenge. And now I'm going to turn it over to Alexis Gleiser, who's going to talk to us a bit about how we put this panel together, how we're going to run it, and how it's going to go. And I promised you we're going to leave plenty of time for participant input.
Great, thank you so much. So hi everyone, my name is Alexis Gleiser. I am a student at American University, a graduate student in the School of Public Affairs in my last semester. Other students joining us, my colleagues Corey Howard and Rachel Leduc are here as well. We are three students representing our class of 7. So there's 7 of us working on this project. Kelly mentioned a little bit about the client perspective and what that looks like, what they're looking for from us. So this is a research-based practicum model course. That's a mouthful, but that is to say that we are guided by their objectives and goals in our research. We are in the middle of our research right now. We started in January and are ending at the end of April. I believe our presentation's the last day of April, so we're a little more than halfway currently. Overall, just to reiterate, our goal is to design a more effective and sustainable relationship between the fields of policing and public health. As Kelly mentioned, these fields are tackling a lot of the same issues and working towards similar goals. So we want to look at that in our research. So we have some promises we've made to IACP as our client. First, we want to understand the current state of response from each system to identified relevant community incidents. So what does that look like out in the community? What is each system responding with? What models are they using? Second, to evaluate current issues and probable solutions within these responses. So diving a little bit deeper, what's working and what's not working. And then third, to propose informed strategies and approaches conducive to the partnership between policing and public health. So that is our overall goal, as Kelly mentioned, is in the end through our research to come to a consensus, which we're not at yet in our research right now, not at that stage, but in the end, we will reflect on everything we've worked on so far this semester and produce a product for IACP for them to use and produce this internal document for their use on their work and their projects. So I will pass this off to Rachel. She will talk to us a little bit more of policing. We'll also hear from Corey, my colleague, a little bit later in the presentation. And we also have Jennifer Wood joining us. She is a subject matter expert and project advisor for our practicum course. She is a professor at Temple University and also the lovely host and organizer of this conference. So thank you, Jen, for allowing us to present today. So from here, I'll pass it off to Rachel.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Alexis. So what we've decided to do is break down the research into 3 distinct yet overlapping sections. So exploring policing, public health, and then exploring alternative and co-response models. So for policing right now, we are trying to identify current police department policies regarding public health and current trends regarding public health. So identifying demographics of communities served, of the population, budget numbers, crime rates, things like that. And so for our lenses, we're looking through federal, state, county, local, and then we're also looking, through the lenses of our 4 main public health categories that we've decided on for this project: domestic violence, mental health, substance use, and homelessness. We are utilizing IACP net to explore current policing policy, as well as collecting data and research on overall nationwide rates of homelessness, domestic violence, mental health, and substance use. Now I'm going to pass it off to Corey.
Okay, hello everyone. So we've split, so for the majority of our research, we split up into 2 different sections, as Rachel has been talking about. We split up into the domestic, into the public health aspects, and into the policing aspect. My portion has been focused predominantly on from a public health lens. From a domestic violence standpoint, our research has consisted of looking into existing resources for survivors and victims of domestic violence from a public health lens. And some of our research has shown that the most effective form of intervention must be co-led by community and advocacy groups along with the police to ensure everybody is able to ensure all victims are able to receive the resources they need. And some of our research has led us to finding some of the barriers of domestic violence, which include a lack of training from the police officer standpoint, and also the need to create more trauma-based, more trauma-informed training for people who are in policing and people who are panelists for public health. I'm sorry, am I echoing? I'm sorry, give me just a second, I have some audio issues. So for a lack of training standpoint, as I was saying, it needs to be more trauma-informed. It needs to be, we need to identify primary aggressors. So the research has shown that we need to identify more primary aggressors to influence policy. I'm sorry, I'm just having some severe audio issues. I'm having feedback. Okay.
You're not echoing. You're not echoing out here, Corey. You're good.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're fine out here.
Okay. Sorry, it's just on my end. Sorry, I just lost my place. So yeah, so for the research, we've also found that it needs to include primary aggressors, in the sense of we need to identify who they are to ensure that victims of domestic violence are getting resources they need to, and also we need to change the policies for multiple states, because certain states have arrest laws where both individuals would be going to jail regardless of if the victim has been defending themselves, or if they, if they've been going through a history of domestic violence and this is the one instance that they decide to, stand up for themselves. We need to identify those topics. And from a substance abuse standpoint, my research has consisted of looking at existing resources for individuals with substance abuse disorders, and then which has included international resources, which has ranged from both Scotland and Switzerland. And some of the aspects we found from that is that in the US, approximately 10 million full-time adults have a substance abuse disorder. And of those, approximately 10% is only has access to substance abuse treatment. And then some of the current barriers that we have found is the respect and understanding needs. Some of the current barriers we have found is the need for collaboration between public health and police. It's currently underestimated because because there have been issues from both the police side and from the public health side. And yeah, I'm going to now turn over to Alexis. I'm sorry, I'm just having some audio issues.
Great, thanks, Corey. So Corey discussed domestic violence, substance use. I will be discussing mental health and homelessness. And it's important to note that within our research, we are looking at the 4 categories as cycles and identifying where these cycles overlap perhaps, and how they overlap, and the details of what that looks like. So that's just important to note to preface this. So in terms of mental health, in our research, we found that mental illness and severe mental illness is very prominent in society. There's millions of Americans that are experiencing mental health conditions, and the rate of treatment for these is roughly half. So we want to look at the gap. Who is accessing mental health treatment? If they are, if they are not, what is the reason behind that? What do resources look like for an individual in need who is not receiving treatment? We know that co-occurring disorders, tying back to Corey's topic of substance abuse, we know that co-occurring disorders heighten areas of need and may redirect treatment routes. Currently, as far as the models go in our research, we found that there's often a mixture of clinicians, behavioral health clinicians, social workers, crisis responders, police, and that models can have varying mixtures of these professionals and response teams. There are some barriers. One, I would like to highlight stigma of mental health in society today. We've made progress, but there definitely is still a ways to go in terms of mental illness stigma and mental health stigma. Some other barriers that we've found is in terms of the sequential intercept model, we found that there's a lot of treatment taking place down the line at perhaps stage 3 or 4, when an individual is already incarcerated, they're already in the system, or perhaps in the reentry stage. And we like to see treatment, in general, but there really is that emphasis on intercept 0. And what does that look like pre-arrest and diversion wise? Moving on to homelessness, we're conducting literature reviews of this topic, as well as mental health and the other 2 cycles in terms of how we're researching this, also conducting first-person interviews with practitioners in the fields. So that has definitely helped us gain insight from the people doing the work out there currently. Research for homelessness has spanned from big and small cities, geographic areas across the country, from housed and unhoused homeless populations. We know that there's an ongoing push for housing first, and that policy of housing an individual first, and then providing community resources and going from there with how to help this individual from there if they have perhaps compounding factors on top of homelessness, on top of being homeless. We've also researched current police-involved programs, and we know that many of these are currently proactive and more of an outreach style. So instead of being more reactive in the response, being proactive in the communities. But we also know that there are reactive response to homelessness, perhaps in crisis, but we do want to draw the line between these 2 and looking at what does response look like for a unhoused person in crisis, and what does a response look like for responding to unhoused person who is not in crisis. So drawing the line there, and that's something we'll work on more in our research down the line as we move forward. So from here, this wraps up our public health section. I will pass this along to Rachel. She will take us into alternative and co-response models.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexis. So like Alexis spoke about, there are a variety of public health professionals that are working with police and all first responders in alternative and co-response models. So a co-response model or an alternative response model is just anything, alternative, anything different from our traditional, police dispatch without any, particular training. Co-response models a lot of the time are combination of mental health professionals or, some sort of public health professionals, EMTs, and police officers / law enforcement. Most of the alternative and co-response models we've been looking at come in at intercept 0 and intercept 1. So again, we're looking at, the 4 main categories: domestic violence, mental health, substance use, homelessness. We're collecting a list of alternative response and co-response models that are currently active in the United States or upcoming in the United States. We're identifying, demographic information on community served, very similar to how we're looking at the different police departments and their policies, identifying the response model outcomes, the populations that they serve, and the budget numbers, cost, effectiveness, everything like that. So we are utilizing the Policy Research Associates sequential intercept model, like Alexis said, for categorizing response models. So we're currently, we're exploring current and upcoming ones. Again, like I said, specifically related to our public health. Perfect. I'm gonna pass that off to Corey.
Okay. One additional thing we'll also take into consideration is critical considerations in terms of policy practices, which we're currently looking at, as Rachel was talking about, different co-responding models and successful alternatives to policing and alternatives to public health, including community response opportunities. We're also looking at evidence-based practices when possible, including, including adapting more cognitive behavioral therapy aspects into our programs. We're also looking at current barriers to both public health and policing that would prevent the more synchronous ability of the two groups, which include COVID-19 and other issues, including like the current George Floyd protests. We're taking that into consideration as well. And then from a socioeconomic lens, we're looking at how do we ensure everybody gets the treatment they need. One thing that everybody always talks about is equity, but we're looking into what does equity actually mean? Because, public health and policing is not a one-size-fits-all model. Every aspect is different for everybody. Every aspect is unique to the individual. So one thing we're looking at into is who gets what, who's going to get what kind of treatment, where are we going to get it, and then how. This equity is also going to take into consideration areas of the country that have smaller agencies for both the public health and for the police. Organizations and communities that don't have access to the 24-hour, 24/7 models of response for either police or for public health. So we're looking into what are the best practices for those organizations. We're also looking into better communication between the agencies to ensure there is more that they're more in sync. And we're also looking into, again, as I previously said, how can communities utilize the resources they have to ensure everybody can get the treatment options that they need for public health. I'm now going to turn it over to the next person.
Thank you, Corey. I just wanted to reflect on this project, from an educator's perspective and somebody who's obviously is overseeing this conference, been trying to grow this space and to really grow translational research and research that's impactful on the field of policy and practice. And so to me, what's really exciting about this work that Professor Furman is leading out of American University, of course, the content is incredible, but it's actually the modality that this course is being taught in, which is this client-based practicum. And I think that that's exciting for a couple of different reasons. The theme of this conference is defying boundaries, and I think that a problem that has beset this field for a long time is researchers, young and old, struggling to influence the field of policy and practice. And I love how students are driving this process, but also that they're doing it for a client. And that this client is the IACP, who is a global leader in this space and will be highly influential. And so the fact that the client wants this and wants to understand, what's the latest in thinking, what's the latest in best practice, how can we really make a difference and sort of set the tone for the country and for the world, really, and how we can strengthen the policing public health nexus. So I love the fact that this is student driven. I love the fact that this is client driven. And I love the fact that it's, committed to building a platform of evidence and a platform of best thinking in this space. So, I would love to enter into dialogue with folks who are on this call. And I see my dear friend Inga Heyman from Scotland. She may have some thoughts. I mean, I have to say, I've never been involved in a client-based practicum before. This is new to me, and I really think it's groundbreaking. So I would love to hear others' thoughts, whether you're a practitioner, I see we have a practitioner attending, or whether you're an educator and whether you think that this is a model that we can see in other places or perhaps exists in other places. So I look forward to the conversation and thank you all for your great presentation. John,
Thurman, you're muted.
Okay, and I'm the moderator. Jen, thanks so much for your comments and for being with us and supporting us. If you'll notice, the people that are with us today, our participants, it's only 9 o'clock, right? So we very deliberately left a whole lot of time for dialogue here and questions and comments. Because our sense is that we kind of know where we're going and we're off to a very strong start. And I think our client is just feeling pretty good about it, but we've got a lot of problems. And let me just say that as we go to Q&A, our problems are in moving what would be a perfect model, or at least a very imperfect but really good model of this partnership between public health and policing out to all 18,000 police agencies in America. We've got plenty of challenges, and just to run down a few, it is that number 18,000. The police departments in America, because of our very unique democratic model, it's always voluntary adoption. There is no national standard, and so we're talking about voluntary adoption. And if you combine voluntary adoption with a culture, and I've been in policing for half a century, but there is a culture of resistance within policing, and probably in other organizations and other professions as well. But culture of resistance in policing is problematic when you combine that with voluntary adoption. So we've got those kind of things to face. We also have size and type of agency. Are those 18,000 agencies run from 5 officers or 3 officers, to 35,000 officers, and all different types and kinds of missions and visions. So we've got that as something we have to address as well. And then you step back and go way back to the global nature here. The two systems themselves, public health and policing, we know have, and public health and public safety for that matter, have very different missions and very different organizational structure, organizational culture. So got to deal with that. And finally, last but not least, we have the 911 system. We have trained everybody in America to make one call to 3 digits, to 3 numbers. And we're not likely to, nor does anybody, I think, is inclined to put a list up and try and tack a list up, tape a list behind your cell phone and put it on your app that says, here's who you call for what specific problem. That's not going to work. So we've got a 911 system that's people have been trained to use, but it's not multi-agency, right? It's really principally police and then public safety after that. But some of these new models are clearly going to and are moving toward multi-agency dispatch, where what 911 does is much more sophisticated and suited to what the problem is that they're hearing on the phone and that the dispatcher is taking in. So that's that's exciting, but it's also challenging for us. So with that, I'm going to open this up to questions. I think Jen's going to maybe manage that for us, but we're open to everything. And as I say, you're not just your questions, but your counsel to my students and to us is just as valuable, because we want to make sure we come back to IACP with the right stuff so that they can influence their 30,000 members in 160 countries to really get this movement of this nexus locked in, certainly in the United States, where it needs to be so much.
Thanks so much, John. I've got lots of thoughts, but I wanted to leave it to our attendees if they had any questions. Feel free to raise your hand and I can have you unmute.
No questions yet, huh?
No questions yet.
Well, let me do this then. Let me ask our participant. I see we have 18. I would very much like to ask them a question myself, right? Because it would be very helpful for American University's perspective. And that is if they had the chance, and they do, to counsel our students, as I mentioned, what would they say? What would any of you say who are on this panel with us is maybe the most critical obstacle right now to really moving the collaborative, cooperative model of public health and public safety forward in a massive way versus an agency, one agency at a time. What's the biggest obstacle we're facing?
Oh, we've got a raised hand. Inga. Hi, Inga, go ahead. Inga?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly now, Inga.
Oh, sorry. I think, I'd be really interested to hear what the students think about the idea of austerity and, how we move back into our own silos when we're under pressure financially. And do they see that as being a major barrier to collaborative work and our collaborative practice?
I mean, I can certainly give you my perspective. I'd love to hear those, but I think certainly here in the United States, and Inga, I'm curious to see how this is playing out in Scotland. But part of the debate here is, what new institutions do we need to build, right? So this isn't just working with existing public safety institutions and breaking through barriers and developing multi-agency arrangements, but it's also sort of figuring out, do we actually need to build new types of institutions in furtherance of public safety and public health? And one example is in the, that call taking dispatching piece that John was talking about. I mean, could we reimagine what that would look like? That would take incredible resources and investment, right? Because that's a long-term goal to reimagine what our institutional arrangements look like. And so if we're in a sort of position of austerity where we have to watch budget cuts, so we're going to go back to just sort of the budgets that sit underneath the existing institutions we have, right? And work with that rather than sort of carve out budget lines that can go into developing new institutions that might better deal with, for example, call handling and dispatching, or even, may support different modalities of addressing, mental health crises and responding to those. So we keep reinvesting in the same institutions and with the same types of sort of responses and practices, right? So the austerity is not a term that we sort of use here in the United States, but it's this sort of same concern about our budgets are tied to existing institutions, right? And it's hard to sort of release those budgets from it to imagine new possibilities and new ways of thinking. So I think we share that concern, Inga.
I would agree very much. If I could just jump in for 1 second. Typically in the past, in policing in the United States, police have done things in almost an unfettered way, where even if they didn't have the money, they'd say, well, let's just do it anyway, and we'll tell the mayor or the governor later and ask for more money. But no, those times have completely changed, where governing bodies here now are setting very strict guidelines and holding police agencies, even though they are responding to emerging issues, holding them just as accountable to stay within budget. My favorite, positive thought here is just foundations and granting agencies like the Arnold Foundation, Arnold Ventures, who are supporting this conference, I noticed, and this is not an ad for them, but they have certainly set a tone for innovative funding. And I think a lot of organizations, the MacArthur Foundation in Chicago, a lot of foundations have made it clear that they want to fund partnerships and partner-led initiatives where people of different thought and different mission are coming together to be creative and do better and do a better job. So they may well, if not the federal government, they may well lead the charge, and lead the thinking on spending money in partnership versus saying, I want to take all that money for myself, and really setting up that model of really shared leadership and shared funding in partnership. So I have some hope there. And our current president, Joe Biden, of course, oversaw the creation of the Violence Against Women Act here in America. And that Violence Against Women Act really changed the landscape of how we dealt with all violent crimes against women. And so I think that the government, I don't want to leave them out, God forbid, they can have some good influence here as well, depending on, again, their long agenda and when this comes up and gets out there. Okay, so.
I like to just,
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
No.
Okay,
go.
I just wanted to add off to what Professor Furman and what Jen had said. Based on my own experience, both academically, but also in the field, I think there is a lot, of competition within, public health community or public health agencies for those grants, which, while the grants are, obviously really beneficial, the way of accessing them tends to push people deeper into their own silos. The feeling of competition in order to get more resources tends to keep these agencies divided. I think, in any way it would be best to sort of, use companies or organizations like Arnold Ventures and others to sort of combine together and develop sort of a nationwide, I would say pool of, finances and resources to then help implement this. Because I think if we, the traditional way of going about it in the United States really does push people into their own silos, especially when, different areas have different resources, different areas have different organizations, and those don't necessarily line up with how much need they have in the area for these services.
And I think there's also something there about us not asking people, citizens, what they want and what they need. We make assumptions, don't we, of what a service could look like without actually involving people in the development of those opportunities.
Yeah, it's interesting, Inga. I've been having this conversation with Amy Watson, who works in the mental health space, and we've been arguing, with respect to what are the best crisis intervention models, and where's the field going, and where do we need to go next? And I think we're both at a place where we need to strip back to basics and say, what do people want when they call the police? Like, what do they want when they're in crisis, or what do they want when they're experiencing some type of issue that may not be best addressed by police, but they feel that police are the best quick response to that. So what do people need and what do people want? What does that first responder look like, right? So we have a panel later this week that's workshopping different scenarios focused around different mental health crises, and bringing people together from, fire and EMS and police and mental health advocacy to sort of walk through scenarios and say, so what would be the best first response in these different scenarios? And I think this ties to my point around sort of different types of institutions or different types of first responders that we haven't thought of yet. Maybe it's peers with lived experience that are the best first responder in certain cases, or and or backed up by police just in case there's a public safety need there. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, Inga, it's like if we start with that, right, then the budget comes later, right? Like what does this look like?
Yeah, because too often we think we know, I've been nursing for 40 years and I still think I know what people need, and I probably do not really know what people need. And I think there's something there about being bold, not just about how services are delivered, but actually being bold about reimagining new positions and new roles and new, is there a hybrid nurse police officer? Is there what could that look like under different legislative frameworks? And so, I think one thing that COVID has taught us is my goodness, we can be bold and we can act really quickly when we really need to. And so, maybe we need to harness that boldness. But that takes money, doesn't it? And takes persuasion and the right people being around the table, which is hard.
And I
Thank
think
you.
this ties back to Rachel's point. Sorry, John, I was just, around sort of where budgets come from and where funding comes from, and sort of funders come from different spaces. You have criminal justice funding, in our context anyway, the National Institute of Justice, or it's National Institute of Health funding, right? And they've each been carving out pieces where they're funding cross-sectoral research. But those funding schemes are themselves siloed, right? And so can't we just create a budget that's not tied, right, to certain sets of institutions or disciplines, but that are tied to solving problems?
Yes.
A problem-solving budget, and it doesn't matter where you come from. It's just you've got a solution to a problem that you want to test and you need money for. And as you say, Inga, it could be like a new type of first responder or co-response model.
So I was just going to add, Jen, that we're talking about the money thing. We have a siloed money situation. We talked about resistance to change in the policing field, but we've also got this siloed approach to funding, so much so that when I was with the governor's office in Illinois back in the 80s, when we actually handled the slicing of the pie of the state budget out to each of the areas of police, courts, and corrections. And Terry Gaynor was the head of the Illinois State Police at the time. And Terry sat there at the table, and for the first time in the history of the state of Illinois, he said, "I'd like to give some of my budget money away to corrections because they had terrible prison crowding and conditions, and said, I'd like to take some money away from the state police and give it to corrections." That comment caused the entire meeting to explode. People left the room, took a coffee break and ran out of the room, and basically grabbed Terry and put him in a corner and said, "Don't you ever say anything like that again." So this culture goes back a long way. So I hope to other comments and questions.
Yeah, Isaac. Isaac, I've unmuted you. Can you hear us?
Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay. So it was interesting as you were all talking about funding. So my agency, New York City Police Foundation, represents that public-private partnership and where those extra dollars come from. And what we have found is by providing that partnership, we actually allow for testing in a different way that typically government, city, et cetera, budgets don't allow. And so I was very curious to hear from IACP, what is it like to have this external consultant come in to look at the projects that you're working on, as we're contemplating doing the same for a couple of our projects, which are in this sphere?
Kelly, that one's for you.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it. I'm not quite sure I understand what this. Can you explain that again? Like what specifically you're asking?
Yeah. So really what I'm asking is, so as you know, when we're dealing with private foundations and funding from businesses, they like to see proof of concept and proof of results. And so one of the models that we've looked at potentially doing is similar to using American University to do the research and evaluation on. So I was curious how you felt the process was going and sort of how you see that being utilized to influence the people who we know have to be influenced in order to achieve change.
Oh, thank you for that. Yes. So we at IACP, we have funding for projects and initiatives that are, across both public from, Department of Justice or just Department of Transportation to private from, Arnold and MacArthur and different initiatives. And obviously those initiatives that have a component, they all have a component of demonstrating effectiveness, whether that means, obviously the Department of Justice, and they want to see performance metrics and measured on every single program, and any application that we submit has to actually describe what we will do to demonstrate performance. But then we have more rigorous evaluation aspects of our projects. In fact, one which we're very involved in, and it's very relevant to this discussion, is our efforts with the University of Cincinnati, who's leading work around evaluating the national CIT, which is now renamed, but curriculum that was developed over the past couple years through the Department of Justice Assistance and CIT International and Policy Research Associates and IACP and University of Cincinnati. And now we're incorporating aspects into it involved with that provide interaction and response to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And part of that work is that, University of Cincinnati is evaluating, and we're working on piloting this. We actually have our applications out now to police agencies to identify jurisdictions who want to implement this new training, and University of Cincinnati will be evaluating it. And we have 2 more situations where we'll be seeking pilots for training and technical assistance to jurisdictions looking at collaborative crisis response, as well as hybrid training related to crisis response, which we have worked with University of Cincinnati in identifying there's very little virtual or any type of hybrid CIT collaborative response training for law enforcement out there in the field. So I believe I understood your question is that we obviously want to make sure that we are implementing programs that are and promoting programs that have the best evidence. So that's a real priority for IACP. I hope that answered your question.
Well, Kelly, thank you. I want to jump in too, if I can. Isaac, it's a great point. Particularly your comment about what's it like to have the students as quasi consultants coming in and having the freedom to make comment. This is my pitch is another sea change I'd like to see is I think every practitioner in America should go to their local universities and say, do you run client-based practicums here? Because what a wonderful way to leverage university resources, but to create amazing educational opportunities for students, and I think you'll get my drift here, and to really mainstream radically good ideas. Because Kelly, I can tell you right now, Kelly has never said, when the IACP told my students to go and said, here's your challenge, now go, there was never a comment about it, but stay away from this, or stay away from that, or don't go there because that's politically sensitive. Our students, are absolutely free to come back to IACP and say whatever they believe is the best, the evidence-based kinds of stuff that IACP should be pushing out to its membership. So that ought to happen all over the country. Police departments all over the country should be able to go to their local universities and say, come on in, I'm ready for some help. Because it also gives the department a sense of insurance, as it were, to say, if I'm the chief, I take that report and I say, this is what future leaders from this university said we should be doing. Why isn't this something we should be listening to very carefully? So I'm a big, you can tell I'm a big fan of the practicums, because they have a role to play in changing how people think and how people view what some might consider radical change. In our case, I think it's just reasonable change.
I think too. Oh, so you go, Rachel. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to Inga's point, I think that is absolutely true. But I think also something, sort of figuring out what the communities want, or what the communities need, or what the communities are asking for, and then utilizing university practicums to test, those asks, or those, potential models that they have created or they are asking for, might be beneficial in a way that there is, I think, often a disconnect between, the ivory towers / universities and, people living day to day in the communities. Not that, university students don't, but often it's a very different experience. So I think that could be a unique sort of hybrid of the two of those.
I was just going to add that certainly where I sit at Temple, I'm seeing a sea change and it's been quite profound. I mean, I'm seeing in my graduate students, but also undergraduate students, that they want to make a difference. They want to do research that matters. And I think, in the time that we're in, the issues of equity and racial injustice are very, foremost on their minds. I'm starting to see really a new generation of students coming up that I think are almost frustrated by academic reward structures, in the sense that, you do well if you publish in obscure journals that 5 people read, and you're actually not engaging with communities, hearing what communities want, hearing what communities are experiencing, and working with practitioners to make a difference in the world. So I think that's happening. That's a current that I'm feeling where I sit, especially in a university in Philadelphia, with incredible diversity in our student population, who have really been feeling really strongly what's been happening across the nation in terms of structural racism. So I think that piece is important, and it seems to me, although I'd be curious to hear Kelly's perspective, I think in the world of practitioners and police leaders, there has been a step forward, I think, in sort of opening themselves up and entering into dialogue around how we do address issues of equity in policing, but also in public health. I mean, it's everywhere, right? It's not just a policing issue. So I see, if we take this new modality of sort of client-based practicum and pair that with this cultural shift in education, and I think in this new generation of students that want to have a voice, that excites me, right? I mean, there's still lots of challenges, as John set out, but I feel like we're inching forward to maybe doing more sort of meaningful translational work, where we're actually taking evidence and new ways of thinking and making a difference.
Very good. So do we have other questions or comments?
Inga.
It's me again. I'm sorry. Mine is more a comment than a question. It's just to say how amazing the students are. I'm just so overawed by the work that you're doing, and I'm just, it's fun. And I've had the joy of meeting Corey online, and it's just, we want to have this happening in Scotland. It would be so wonderful. So thank you so much.
Inga, may I just ask you, I mean, is there anything analogous to a client-based practicum or practicums in Scotland in terms of linking students to leaders in the field?
Yeah, well, we do. We actually have it the opposite way around as well. So we've got a process on linking operational officers, police officers, to academia. So if they had and we do that through CYPR, practitioner fellowships. So if someone had if an officer had a really interesting idea that they wanted to explore and they needed some academic support to do that, then they're linked to someone in academia, and we, help them put the research together and move forward that way. Certainly in health, I mean, our students, we from mental health perspective, if they're involved in any research as well, we will link them into practice very quickly. And I have the nursing students who go and work in the police cells and do that, and they might be involved in research there. Is that what you're meaning, Jen?
Yeah, it's just, I'm just love that you're here, Inga, because, we're just so, our frame of reference is so limited, right? in our own country context. So I just love
We're
having
all a
this
bit like
dialogue.
that, Jen.
So thank you so much. Pat, I'll unmute you. Pat Griffin.
There we go. Thank you, Jen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, fine.
Oh, terrific. Well, I would also like to echo, thank you so much, Professor, and for all the students who have kind of shared this work, and to the IACP for welcoming in this research-based practicum. Myself, I work at a relatively small liberal arts college in the Philadelphia area. And I suppose, COVID really pushed us to explore alternative ways of working with graduate students who we have a capstone as opposed to a master's thesis course. And so this capstone course was intended to really align students with employers in the area organization. So I really like the kind of structure that you built around this, and I think that's really valuable. And for the IACP to kind of take a lead with a leading research institution. So again, thank you. This is really helpful. I suppose maybe what I want to make is an appeal, and I'm not exactly sure how to suggest we go about this. But as we know, like throughout the past, few days, and for those who work in the policing field, there are 18,000 roughly policing agencies in the United States. In addition, there are, I think, over 20,000 institutions of higher education that range from the community college level to four-year institutions to our major research institutions. And not every one of those 18,000 police agencies will align with one of the major research institutes. So maybe this is an appeal to the IACP to try to help even some of our smaller colleges and universities get connected in a broader way. And then also at the academic side of the house, maybe sharing some of these best practices with us at our regional meetings for criminal justice, or there is a publication with the, ASD on, teaching. So I think that this would just be so valuable, because the smaller agencies and the smaller universities, I think, also have something to add beyond just your typical, ride-along internship. So anyway, a bit of an appeal, but also an expression of gratitude for your forward thinking and for the contribution to the field. Thank you.
Pat, I just have to jump in and say thanks so much for that comment. I'm from Philly, originally born and raised in Philly, and then I did go to Temple. I ended up at Temple through my graduate studies, so I'm an owl, just like Jen is an owl. But my brothers all went to Kutztown, up northeast of Philly, and they got an incredible education at Kutztown, a very small college up above Philly. But I think even to broaden your appeal, there are smaller universities, colleges and community colleges all over the country where incredibly talented faculty have gone in to teach incredibly smart young people, who aren't going to get into major universities necessarily. But the bottom line is that there's millions of there's any number of partnerships that can be built by smaller local agencies, mid-sized local police agencies, and their regionally appropriate schools, right? Regardless of how big or resourceful they are. Now, clearly, University of Cincinnati and places like that, and Temple and Sam Houston, sure, headquarters for brilliant research. But the truth is, a lot of this stuff that needs to be explored can be well explored by talented people in these smaller universities as well. So I think I've always pitched, and I think Kelly, with my years at IACP, that building those relationships, if you've got a local college, get on over there and talk to them and see what they can do with you and for you.
Thank you.
I don't see any more hands raised.
Well, then maybe our panelists would like a coffee break here. not our panelists, excuse me, our participants, but yeah, I'm ready to wrap if you would like me to, Jennifer, if we have no further questions or comments.
Sure.
Okay, and I'll go short. First of all, I just want to thank you and thank Temple and thank Left. This is this conference to our practicum was always an incredible thing that we were looking forward to. Our students are coming on and visiting with individual panels as your program runs out over the week. So thank you so much for an amazing event. I want to thank Alexis and Rachel and Corey, and of course the rest of our class, a relatively small class who couldn't be here. But anyway, thanks to the students for doing a really, really wonderful job of putting our message out. We appreciate that. Again, I think that my last comment would be that I think we're all in this together, and it goes back to our conversation that there are silos and there are people with specific missions and visions, and there is resistance to change from internally from different organizations, but we're all in this together. And I know that from our perspective at AU, we want this work to turn into improved safety. And the bottom line would be improved safety for everybody, for mothers who call about their son who has mental health issues and is extremely upset. We want those mothers and sons to be safe. For professionals in the field of domestic violence and homelessness, social workers, we want them to be safe and not get sent to the wrong call that is turning violent, and then we put them in danger. This relationship between public health and public safety is a critical one of the most critical ones I have seen in my career. And so we appreciate being here to talk about it. And I would also welcome all the participants who didn't jump on the line. Feel free to reach out individually to any of us if you'd like when we conclude or after we conclude. And again, Jennifer, thank you so much for your invitation to participate.
Well, thank you to all my wonderful friends at American. This has been a wonderful partnership. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody.